Welcome back, guys, to another CM Cake tutorials. In this tutorial, we're going to make a Peeps inspired cake, a Bunny Peeps inspired cake. We have beautiful layers of vanilla cake and buttercream. We also have a beautiful standing finish look with sugar coating on the outside, just like a Peeps would look like. I added some nice beautiful Easter details, some eggs, some little sprinkles. It's a very fun and easy cake to make, even though it's a structure cake. So I want to go over all the details with you, how I made the eyes and the little nose, how I made the bunny ear stand up and be structurally sound. As always, using a board to create our finished structure cake. And before we get started, just make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can get more tutorials like this. Also, all ingredients and materials will be listed in the description box below. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to leave some comments, and let's just get right to it. The structure. For this cake, I'm using a wooden board as some of my other cakes that you've seen on my channel previously, and I have a flange. This is a 1/2 inch flange, and my board is a 10-inch board. And what I'm doing is I'm pre-drilling the holes into my board, so it's a little bit easier for me to just drill the actual screw into it. And what we're going to do is we're going to use some PVC pipe to create the structure for our Peeps cake. The reason why I have to pre-drill my holes into the board is this is a very sturdy board with a finish, and it is a little bit hard sometimes just to do it with the screw. And you might be more successful than me in just drilling the holes by itself, but just feel like for me this is what works. And once the holes are pre-done, I can just go ahead and safely and securely drill my screws into it. Just always make sure you're centered if that is what your project calls for. In this case, I was a little bit back just because I wanted to have a little bit of space for my decoration. At this point, when I had started the idea of the cake, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with the design, so I just wanted to give myself a little bit of room so I can make that decision a little bit later. So if you're a little bit off center, that's perfectly fine. It's actually, I encourage it. Just that, again, it gives you a little bit more opportunity to have a little bit of an open space in the front. You can write a name, you can write happy birthday, any message really that you want to do. Once your flange is secured to your board and you have put the screws all the way in, go ahead and add your male adapter. Again, I'm using 1/2 inch measurements for all of the parts of these Peeps cake. And we now have to add our PVC pipes. And I'm going to walk you through what I did for this particular cake. I'm going to be sharing some measurements. Again, as I always say, your project will be different depending on what size and serving cake you need. It's always good to have a picture reference, a toy, something that will help you scale. So I'm going to cut what will be part of the body of our Peeps Bunny Cake. And again, the idea is to have a sound structure on the inside so our Peeps cake can stand on its own without the fear that it will fall off. I'm adding a T connector, and my height at this point is 8 inches, but we really want to be at about 7. So accounting for the flange, the PVC pipe, the male adapter, and even the T connector, at this point I wanted to be at about 7 inches. So I went ahead and removed 1 inch from that PVC pipe that I added onto my male adapter, then added my T connector, and now I'm a little bit more comfortable with that measurement. Again, this particular cake wasn't as strict with measurements because it's just a Peeps cake, right? And I think I had a little bit of a more open canvas when it came to what I really wanted to convey. And now I'm adding PVC pipe to the sides, and in a minute here you'll see I had to adjust quite a bit this measurement. So the idea is that with the T connector and the two 90-degree angle connectors that we're going to put in a minute, we wanted to have a total measurement of 4 inches. So accounting for the T and the 90-degree angles connectors that are going to be what form and add to create our ears, we want just a total of 4 inches. So I'm going to let you watch this. It's just a little step that I always like to make when I make cakes. People typically ask me, how much in advance do you plan? Sometimes a lot, sometimes not so much. Again, depending on how comfortable you feel with a design, I would say the structure part of a cake is what could take the most time. You're comfortable with baking, you're comfortable with knowing how to crumb coat, you're comfortable with knowing how to stack a cake, that's great. But the particular and more time-consuming piece of any cake structure is the structure itself. So I invite you to really take that into consideration when you're also charging for your cakes. You want to make sure that your preparation time, the time that you're spent really understanding a structure, how to best come about to create it, it's very important as well. So in this, you can see I'm at 6 inches. So it's 2 inches a little too wide. So what I ended up doing, and if you have watched my gecko cake, the tutorial, I think it's one prior to this, you can go ahead and watch it if you like. I invite you to really look at that one. That was a little bit more comprehensive tutorial, but I did the exact same principle as I'm doing now. I'm actually cutting onto the connector itself. So the 90-degree angle connector, by cutting that, it actually gives me a little bit of more room to have less measurement of the actual structure, and it's not going to interfere with my final product. And so I went ahead and cut both 90-degree angle connectors, and I could see that I'm still a little too big. So what I decided to do was go ahead and cut the actual T connector, and I'm removing a tad bit more of the 90-degree connector here, but you want to be careful not to cut too much. We are going to super glue this pieces with some high heat hot glue, but you also want to make sure that your connector fulfills its purpose, which is to have a grip onto the other pieces, and you end up with a nice sturdy structure. So what I will say is, one thing I noticed in cutting the connectors was there's a point where the PVC that you're putting into that connector cannot go any further. There's a little bit of a elevated area inside. So having that in mind, I went ahead and decided, you know what, let me cut the T. It will make the measurement, decrease, because the T will be shorter on the sides. Therefore my PVC pipes and the 90-degree angle connectors will be a little bit closer together. Also, if you're new to my channel, what you saw me use in there, it's what's called a PVC cutter. It's very easy to maneuver, or I should say it's easier to cut. It's very low pressure, so it's not hurting your hands, and it does the job. I got these at the hardware store. They're about $10, and I love them because I also do structures with threaded rod, but threaded rod obviously is harder. It's you need wire cutters or even a saw sometimes, depending on the project and the thickness of the threaded rod, which, don't get me wrong, I also love, but PVC is so much easier to cut. Okay, so now you see I reached 4.5. I'm happy with that measurement, because what I can do is just adapt to that and create my ears around that measurement, thinking, exactly where I'm going to be able to put the Rice Krispie treats, which is what we're going to use to create our ears. Now I'm adding an extra piece of PVC to that 90-degree angle adapter or connector rather, so that I can have further structure inside the ear. So it's gonna help keep the ears nice and sturdy. You don't need a whole lot. As a matter of fact, I will encourage you not to create this particular PVC piece all the way to the top of your ear, because what you don't want is running into having too much PVC or having to create an ear that's too big so that you can hide that actual PVC. And you're gonna see that in my cutting, I actually end up with one side a little bit higher than the other. That's totally fine. Again, as long as you don't hit the very tip of your ear, it should be all fine. So again, we end up with something that looks like this, and you have again, at the bottom we'll put our cake, on the top we'll put our ears, and the idea is that the ears will start right at that T where that T ends, and anything below that will be just our stacked cakes. Now carefully remove some of the parts, remembering where they go. It gets very easy. You can mistake the pieces if you take them out. You don't know where to put them back on. So we are using a high heat super glue hot gun, and I believe I'm using Gorilla Glue. I'll make sure to list all the ingredients and the materials that I use in the description down below. So what I'm doing is carefully adding some of the glue, and you can see here in a minute some of it drips. It's very hot, so be careful, and just add a little bit at a time, making sure those connections, especially the ear ones, because it's coming, the ears should not weigh too much, but again, depending on the size that you're creating for this cake, you want to make sure that nothing wiggles or that it could become loose. You want to make sure that it's structurally sound so that you can have a good structure for your cake. As usual, covering our metal pieces and our PVC with some aluminum foil tape. And again, I'll leave all the materials that I use for this cake in the description down below. You want to make sure you cover everything, make everything food safe, and also cover that glue that we used. This glue is non-toxic. Some people in the industry say that it's food safe. Again, anything foreign, you just want to make sure you cover and protect the cake. Anything that's going to be eaten, you just want to make sure it's nice and protected. The cake. I have a vanilla cake that I have colored in yellow and purple, and I'm using 6-inch rounds, and I'm going to put a little bit of simple syrup in this cake just because I wanted a little bit of extra moisture in them. And I'm using this Merrick Sugar Cake Show vanilla cake recipe, the one for structure cakes. In this case, I am having to cut my cake because I did a whoopsie, and it's good because now you get to see it and not do it. So I went ahead and created my structure and cover everything with aluminum foil tape, but now I have to cut my cake because I don't have where to put it from the top, which is totally fine. I mean, it's still doable, good sturdy cake that allows me to do that without it crumbling. So again, I would highly discourage you from using a box cake for this particular cake or any other structured cake that you use. But if you decide to, as you should, not put the tea until after you're done stacking the cake, just go ahead and wrap up just up until the point of that initial PVC pipe tube cover it all up, put your cake through and stack it with the buttercream, and then you can go ahead and put the tea on the top. But for the continuation of this tutorial, I'm just gonna guide you as how I did it with even having the tea and everything else already put up. So I'm just stacking cake, buttercream, and of course adding the simple syrup before the buttercream, and I'm gonna do that all the way to the top where the very end of the tea starts. So again, the ears are gonna start at the top of the tea, so anything under that will be cake. And you can see that mine, it looks like it's cracking, but it's just the opening that I had to make so that I could get my cake into it. But always make sure that you're having a nice even cake on the bottom. So if you're a person that adds a lot of buttercream or a little bit of buttercream, have that in mind. If it's more buttercream that you like, I would use a more sturdy recipe. And again, I have just a tad more of cake to add before I meet the tea section. So I'm gonna use one less piece of cake, but in this case I'm going to add it a little bit different. So I'm gonna cut it in half, and then I'm going to put a little less buttercream and just put it to the side. So that way I meet the level of where the tea starts, and I also have enough cake. I just didn't want to end up with an empty space and risk my ears not having a support under it. For this project, I also decided not to put a board in between. I just wanted whoever, at this point I didn't know who I was going to give it to, but I wanted to be able to have a person, whoever was getting the cake, cut through it without having to worry about a board in the middle, because again, it's such a tight cake, there was no room for a board to have to be taken out. I could have cut it in half and put it on each side, but just to save that extra work for the person having to cut it, I just went ahead and left it all together without having a board or straws for support in the middle. It's a small enough cake that it can withstand it. Carving the cake. To carve this cake, I didn't want to purposely create the same form that a peep had, because it's very, very indented and particular, and although it is very unique and it will enhance the look of the peeps, I thought that it was still gonna look cute if we had left it a little bit all together like my final cake looked like. So what I mean is, if you look at a peeps candy, it has the belly portion very well formed, then it goes onto the cheek areas, and then it has that little roundness where the ears start. So I went ahead and created a very detailed cheek area. As you can see here, the very top of my cake, it's very round, the bottom not so much. And again, I did that on purpose because one, I could add, and I did add a little bit more buttercream. And here you can see the peeps. You see you have the form of the belly, it's flat on the front and the back, but the sides are very pronounced. So you do want to try your best to add a little bit of that. Again, don't sweat it too much. If you didn't, I didn't. If you want it to resemble it perfectly, you will have to add a little bit more buttercream on the sides and shorten that top area where I call the cheeks, because it's where kind of like the face of the peeps is located. Then I went ahead and added my buttercream to crumb coat everything, seal those crumbs in there. And when we're done doing this, I'm going to pop my cake into the freezer for about 10 minutes. You don't want to freeze the cake too much because you don't want it to start crying, as I call it. You don't want the moisture to start coming out in the shape of drops of water, because that's going to then could make your color on your buttercream come out as well and create a messy look. So if you have a refrigerator, put it in there, make sure you leave it for about 20 minutes, make sure that buttercream is nice and tight and hardened, or in the freezer for about 10 minutes. Okay, my cake is now out of the freezer, and I have placed 2 small pieces of cardboard at the top of my cake, and I'm using Rice Krispie treats to create my ears. The reason why I wanted to put a cardboard in there was just so that there was a separation between the Rice Krispie treats and the cake itself. Again, when someone goes and cuts into it, I think it's a little bit easier for them to identify, okay, I shouldn't cut through here. Let me cut through the cake or under that board. And these Rice Krispie treats are edible, of course, but I just feel like sometimes I don't want people getting surprises in me and like, what is this hard thing, you know? Because it's a contrast to the nice, moist cake. So what I'm doing here is I am adding the Rice Krispie treats as they are onto those 2 upper PVC pipe pieces that we put on, and I am looking at a picture as reference, and I'm trying to make sure they're not only even in thickness but also the same height. So again, take your time, look at your pictures, try to be mindful on that side area because that's what's going to be distinctive. They have to be the same flatness or the same how can I say this? When you look at a peep up front, it's very round because you're seeing the sides of it, right? You're seeing the shape of it. But when you look at a peeps on the side of it, they're very flat in the front and in the back. So you want to reflect that on your cake as well. And the peeps in the bunny ears for the peeps are very, very thick, and in the middle specifically, they don't touch each other, but the point at which they start becoming apart, meaning at the point that they become their own ears, one to the left and one to the side, it's very high. It's a very high point. So you're gonna see here, I'm gonna start working more through it and making sure that anything and everything that I see in that particular picture from my Peeps reference is reflected in the cake as well. Also, don't worry too much about the look of the Rice Krispie treats. Any lumps or bumps that you may have, you can always use a serrated knife and make it nice and flat, or you can use your buttercream always to try to cover. As you can see here, I did a finished look with a yellow buttercream, making sure I have those divots and indentations. This is my back, and then you can see in the front I gave it a little bit of a more rounded section, and I went with my spatula and tried my best to create a smooth surface. If you look at a Peeps, you're gonna notice they're not perfectly smooth. They have texture to it because it's marshmallow. So, and also we're gonna use some sugar that I colored here. I used some white sugar and some yellow food coloring, and I noticed that when mixing it, it wasn't doing anything, so you have to get in there with your hands and to be able to color the sugar. So again, don't worry too much about the final buttercream look because the sugar is going to help you cover that. And also, again, the Peeps are not perfectly smooth. They have a texture to them, and I actually think that it makes it look a lot more like a Peep or cake by having a little bit of texture on the buttercream and also covering it in the sugar that we have just colored here. So nice color, same color as the buttercream. And I had a lot of fun with this particular process because I was trying to find the best way to add the sugar onto the buttercream without messing the buttercream. So twofold here. If your cake is too cold, the sugar is not going to stick to the buttercream. And if your buttercream is not stiff enough or cold enough, you could easily make an indent into your cake by trying to push the sugar into it. So I started with a little bit of a measuring spoon and trying to pour it onto it, and it was working. I mean, it was sticking somewhat, but then I realized that it was a lot easier just to throw it at it, and that's exactly what I did. So I made sure my station had I had enough space so that I wouldn't make a mess on the floor with the sugar. And again, if you mess up a little bit of your buttercream, that's totally fine. Once you add the sugar, it's a little bit easier to just go onto the cake and pat it a little bit, because now that the sugar is there, you would probably just touch the sugar. Then I don't even know what is this. It's like a mixing or scraping type of tool, and so I was trying to get it off of the board and onto the cake, but as you can see here, just have fun with it. I just threw it at it and it worked. It was sticking nicely. I just made sure again that I was hitting every single spot. It's very, very minimal, but you do get to notice the spots that are missing the sugar, because clearly they're a little bit more opaque than what the areas or spots that just have the buttercream. So again, just have fun. I think it'll be a nice thing to do with the kids too, if you want to have them involved. Just throwing the sugar at the cake, and it turned out so cute. In the middle of the ears, it does tend to accumulate a lot of sugar, so it was looking a little bit clumpy. So you saw there, I was trying to make sure that I got that evenly distributed, and it worked. So again, just take your time, make sure every single part of the cake is covered in the sanding sugar, and you should get that awesome looking Peeps similar look onto your cake. And here you can see just how our Peeps cake looks with all the sanding sugar incorporated into it. You'll be able to see a lot better once I do the close-up at the end. But if you can see a little bit of the grainy look, it's just like a Peeps. I promise you, it looks amazing, and I think it's a really, really fun cake. Chocolate eyes. Okay, so I have this mold that I got at Amazon. It's just plastic mold. I only use it for food, so nicely washed. As always, wash your materials. And I have some melted chocolate. This is just one of those almond barks, nothing too crazy, nothing too specific. And I'm gonna use that very last size of the mold, because that's what the scale that I was using for this particular cake called for. Those little eyes are so tiny, and what I'm doing is I'm just filling it up with some of my chocolate and scraping off the excess, and then I'm gonna pop it in the freezer for about 2-3 minutes, and I'm going to make 3 of these for our cake. Okay, so now that our chocolate eyes are nice and cool down, I'm going to position the nose right in the center, following that same line along the ears. And if you look at a Peeps, you'll notice they're kind of like high on the proportion of the face. And I am positioning either eye on the side of the nose a little upwards, so you're gonna have a upside down triangle, like very, very cute. Just like that, gives it that immediate look like a Peeps would have. Now I'm taking a grass piping tip. Again, you don't need to do this piece. I wanted to have a finish on the Peeps cake where I could also attach some sprinkles that I'm gonna use later on. You'll see I'm gonna just sprinkle some around this. And again, the cake looks amazing just as is. I just wanted to add a little extra element to kind of tie the whole Easter theme together. And then I'm going to take a Russian piping tip. This big one has a nice ruffle decoration finish, so I am kind of mimicking what would look like a nest, because we're going to use some chocolate eggs to again just tie all the Easter theme together. And I just bought these at Target, but you can use any sort of egg decoration you have. I highly recommend that it be edible. I'm very picky with the things I use for cakes. Everything for me should be edible. Very rare that I'm using something that is not. It might be just a competition piece, or if you do end up having to use something, protect it, make sure it's not touching anything edible, and make sure you always let your client know. These are the sprinkles I'm going to be using. They have a mix of different elements for Easter. They have that beautiful pastel colors in them, and I'm just adding a few here and there to kind of I'm just adding a few here and there to finish our cake. And there you have it, our Bunny Peeps look-alike cake. Beautiful sugary finish, standing on its own, decoration to bring all that Easter theme together, nice little ears. I mean, this is so cute. Guys, this is it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. I really had a lot of fun making this cake. If you liked this video, I invite you to please like it, subscribe to my channel for more videos like this, and I would love to see your creations. Don't forget to tag me on Instagram at CMCakes, and I will see you next time. Bye!